Bonn Park is supported by Block 3 Brewing. Block 3 Brewing in St. Jacobs was started by a group of craft beer-loving friends. And one constant that has remained strong throughout their journey is their dedication to serving a wide, rotating selection of quality beers, from crisp and tropical IPAs to refreshingly tart sours and creamy stouts. One of their most popular beers is their Belgian-style King Street Saison, with its refreshing aroma of citrus, flowers, and bubblegum. Graham Spence of Block 3 attributes King Street Saison's popularity to being approachable to the masses, but still distinct enough to the connoisseur. The brewery, now running for 7 years, has just released a lovely imperial stout called Black is Beautiful. The stout was brewed as part of a collaboration among brewers across the globe to raise awareness for the injustices faced by people of color and support for positive change. 100% of proceeds from Block 3's Black is Beautiful go to the ABC network, focused on reducing social, political, and economic barriers for people of African, Caribbean, and Black descent. Block 3's full-time offerings this summer include Hollinger Helles, a light, easy-drinking German lager, along with their darker, more malt-flavored Vienna-style Village lager. Then there's Block 3's year-round favorite, Fickle Mistress, a deliciously punched, dry-hopped kettle sour with hop-driven flavors of citrus fruits and melon. Or check out their recently released variety of fresh and fruity malt-based seltzers. There's watermelon, lemon lime, and strawberry vanilla. Block 3's brewing retail store in the village of St. Jacobs is open Sunday to Thursday from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. and Thursday to Saturday, 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. For local delivery to your house, you can order through their online bottle shop at block3bottleshop.com. Great things come in small batches.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Welcome to Bonn Park. I'm Sara Geidlinger.
And I'm Marshall Ward.
And today we have Brent Hagerman.
Yeah, Brent teaches a course called The History of Rock.
And I'm jealous.
Me too. And other cool courses in religion and culture. Mm-hmm. And just one of the coolest guys I've ever known.
Yep, he's also a local musician, and he basically knows more about music than I do, which burns a little bit.
For the first time on Bonn Park, we're going to be talking lots about reggae.
Yeah.
Okay, bring him in for some live music.
This dirty little barroom down on the south side. We had to relearn the set list, work out all the breaks. He finally bought a new amp. He sounded truly great. He put the band back together. He called up all the guys. He put the band back together just before he died. He always said we never had a proper last show. No grand finale. And that's no way to go. We'll give him something to remember that we'll talk about for years. About the time we got together for one night and disappeared. He put the band back together. We promised not to fight. We put the band back together just before he died. He called up a promoter that we knew from around town. And he said, boy, the season's changed and there's no money in it now. But if you're willing to just do it for the music one more time, then put the band back together and put it on the line. He put the band back together. All he had to do was ask. He put the band back together, but it was never meant to last. Put the band back together. Felt like we were 21. He put the band back together, and now he'll always be that young. I got my hand on the needle, I control the dance floor, sending out transmissions like it's 1970. 45 and 33 make 78. Watch those bodies move to the sound that the records made. I got my hand on some vintage vinyl from Motown. I'm gonna see what's going on with that Marvin Gaye sound. I'm gonna hit those lovers so close so they never can part. I'm gonna steal a bow from Cupid and start firing darts. Plays. I got my hand on the gear shift and I'll put it in first, blasting off to explore this invisible universe. 2 choruses and a hip drum break. Watch the meter move to the sound that the station makes. I got my hand on the tuner and I'm searching for truth. I'm picking up some frequency from 1972. Of us are caught up like we're in headlights, captured by the room between the radio and the night. Hey, that's the way the music plays. I got my hands on the touch screen and I'm deep in the lists, navigating landscapes of deep sonic interest. Few things are sweeter than the mystery. We're listening to the sound of the 20th century. Music plays.
Welcome to Bonn Park, Brent Hagerman.
Thank you for having me.
It's really nice to meet you. I told you when you came in, I'm really sad I couldn't shake your hand.
Yeah. COVID times.
Yeah. So Brent, we're really excited to have you here for a number of reasons, but I want to start by asking how you and Marshall met.
Yeah, so I met Brent in 2002, and Brent, who is the editor at Echo Weekly, which we'll talk a little bit about, he gave me my very first writing assignment ever.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that is a great story.
Yeah, so I remember walking into the office. I don't remember where it was exactly now.
That was probably across from the new Kitchener City Market.
Yeah, that's where it was. Yeah. And I met him, and Brent said, sure, let's give it a try. And I didn't have any experience writing. I'm not even sure why you gave me an opportunity, but there was a stack of books on his desk, and he said, why don't you grab a book and review it? We start with that. And I looked through them, and there was a wrestling book in there.
Bingo!
Yeah, it was called Tributes. It was about all the wrestlers who had passed away at that time. And it was right in my wheelhouse. I thought, perfect. And I said, how about this? And Brent goes, sure, Matt Osborne will like it. And I knew who Matt Osborne was. And let's talk about Matt. Let's open up by talking about Matt. You just played a song for us about Matt Osborne.
I did, yeah. Let me just say first, though, you have a better recollection of that first meeting than I do. And I probably... we probably linked up because of a mutual friend, Laura Wiebe, who was actually working at Echo, and she was a writer for Echo.
Right.
And she focused mostly on heavy metal, but she also worked in the office and did other things as well.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I think that's maybe where that link happened. And I remember that being a great review that you did.
Yeah, thanks.
So Matt Osborne.
Yeah. Just sang a beautiful song about him. And so I knew who Matt was. I went to Wilfrid Laurier, and I would hear Matt perform in the concourse area there.
What year did you start at Laurier?
1996.
And he was performing in the concourse then?
Yeah.
Because I started in 92 at Laurier. I'm not sure if he was a first or second year. I think he was in second year in 92 because he's the same age as me. And I had gone somewhere else first, and I went there for my second year. But in 92, I think probably my first memory of Laurier is walking through that concourse.
Yep.
And Matt Osborne was playing in the concourse.
Yeah, I think he was playing like a song called Girl with Glasses or
Oh,
something.
you even had the song. I don't
Yeah.
remember the song.
Was it raining or sunny?
There's a big crowd around him of students, like really actively listening to him. And he just sounded amazing.
Yeah.
And then in the years to come, I would see Matt periodically here and there, and I've seen him perform live. And I would see him back in those days, I'd go see wrestling in a bar, a pay-per-view, and I'd see him around. But we never actually met.
Yeah.
And in fact, I wrote an article years after Matt passed away. It was called A Friend I Never Met.
Right.
It was based on things people told me about Matt. And basically the first time you told me, you guys would probably get along great if you knew each other.
Yeah. Both liked wrestling.
Yeah. Tell me about Matt Osborne in that song.
So that song is called "He Put the Band Back Together," and it's basically the lyrics of the song are sort of the experience that Matt put a band back together just before he died, and just to kind of go backwards a little bit. So Matt Osborne, I guess maybe hasn't been established in the conversation yet, but was a musician around Kitchener-Waterloo. He's from Toronto. He passed away in 2004. And he sort of was a very kind of larger than life person in the music scene around here. And, my first interaction with Matt, as I said, going through that concourse and hearing him, and at that time he was playing in the concourse for a school club called the Musicians Network, which I then joined. I think Matt probably convinced me to join it. And the thing I really remember about Matt at that point is that, Matt exuded a lot of confidence, which isn't... It definitely isn't abnormal for a guitarist, a male guitarist, singer, songwriter, right? But at the same time, he didn't have arrogance, and that's not that is kind of abnormal, right? Because lots of singers are very arrogant, lots of guitarists. I'm a singer, I'm a guitarist, I can say these things. And he was very approachable. So he's this guy that was he was tremendous. He was a tremendous musician, but he was very approachable and very open and very welcoming. And a lot of people in this scene felt that, right? And so he kind of gathered lots and lots of people around him through open jams, and I think he kind of mentored lots and lots of people. And my kind of, hanging out with Matt sometime when, I think it was probably while we were at Laurier, or maybe a little bit after Laurier, we started a band together called the Winnebago Blues Band, and it was a band, as the title says, it was a blues band. Its tag was "It's big and it moves." That's the name Winnebago, and it was we both loved the blues. We wanted to play blues covers, and we wrote music and we wrote blues, and we wanted to sing our own songs as well, right? And so we kind of kicked around this town and a few other towns for a couple of years playing in this band with Steve Toms was on bass, and Ian Mollison was on drums. And then the band kind of faded, as bands do. And then in 2004, well, I guess maybe in the fall of 2003, Matt finally wanted to put this band back together. He'd been talking about this quite a bit. He's like, we should really get this band back together because we kind of faded and we never had a really proper last show. We never had a proper gig. We need to get the band back together for one proper last show. And so we talked about this for several months. We put the band together, and then in the early winter of 2004, we had this show in Kitchener. And then 2 months later, he passed away. And so, reflecting on that, I think it was I think I wrote it in 2010 or 2012. Reflecting on that is where that song came from, and this idea that it's kind of a. I mean, I think in some ways it's a tribute to Matt, and it's kind of also a tribute to the joy. That people have in bands together, right? It's really fun to be in a band, and especially as for a guy, it's kind of one of those things where you have really close friends in bands, right? And you may not always have that. I think a sports team might have that, but I don't really play sports, right? And so that's kind of one of those places where
it's a different kind of connection.
It is, yeah. And so I think I was kind of thinking back to that, and sort of it's kind of a description and a tribute, I think, to the idea of being in a band with people that you love, like guys that you love, and hanging out. And then this also has this kind of tragic ending because he passes away.
You mentioned Steve Toms. I went to school with Steve.
Oh, did you?
We were really close.
At Resurrection?
And St. Mark's.
Okay.
Yeah, we were really close. I think he came to us. They moved to Kitchener. And he came to us maybe in the 6th grade, maybe the 7th grade, somewhere around that time. He was such a nice kid. And he was the type of person that was friends with everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and just not a breath went by where we weren't talking about music.
Yeah.
It was always music. And it was my
making you
dad's
laugh.
studio, and so silly, always making us laugh. And we lost touch after high school, unfortunately.
Right.
But yeah, he was a really great person.
He was, yeah. So he was in that band with me, and also Steve and I and Ian, the drummer from the Winnebago Blues Band, started a band called the Jolly Llamas that I know Marshall has heard of. And we put a couple records out in the late 90s and early 2000s.
I want to talk about that, but I just want to wrap up our chat about Matt with my most vivid memory of Matt. And it was March 2002, and I went to see WrestleMania 18 at the Skydome in Toronto. And so there's like 65,000 people in this place, and I was down on the floor with my wife, about 11 rows from the ring. And when the show was over, I remember standing up and turning around. So imagine this mass where the Skydome's full. And I could see Matt in a red T-shirt.
That's
kind
crazy.
of standing up with his arms raised over his head like this, just by himself. Like, I can't believe I saw him.
He's the only
like,
person you see in there. That's
It's like I looked up, I was like,
amazing.
"There's Matt Osborne."
Yeah.
And I always remember that he had his arms raised up in the air, and there's fireworks going off and everything. And anyways, thanks for playing that song.
Yeah, no problem.
And tell us about your music, like the bands you've been in over the years, and.
So I guess that's the Winnebago Blues Band and the Jolly Llamas. Around that same time, I think we put that band together in 1997, and that was with Steve Toms. So Steve Toms was on bass, and Steve and I met at a bar called the Rain Tree, which
The Rain Tree Cafe.
the Rain Tree Cafe. They had
best veggie burger in town. There isn't a good one anymore.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was it was a small little club, right? But it had this wicked jam on Monday nights, and because it was a Monday night, musicians didn't have other gigs, and so a lot of musicians just kind of came to that jam. And I started hanging out there, and as you sort of already mentioned, Sara, like Steve's really outgoing, and so I very quickly met Steve, and we started to sort of jam together and play together. And then I think maybe I roped him into the Winnebago Blues Band first, and then I think after that we started painting together. So I was a house painter and restaurant painter and all those kinds of things. And so Steve joined our crew, and the drummer in that band, Ian, was on that crew as well. And I think we were painting a Eastside Mario's, a brand new Eastside Mario's, in somewhere in the GTA. And there was a lot of paint fumes going around, and we were dreaming up band names. We're like, we're going to start a band, right? And what kind of name? Lots of paint fumes. And I think that's where the name the Jolly Llamas came from, on those paint fumes.
It's a great name.
Yeah, it really is.
And the idea for that band, it was like Steve and I really loved Big Sugar. So, Big Sugar is like this kind of like, blues and some reggae in it. And I really liked reggae. And so we were kind of getting that kind of vibe, but also the Clash kind of vibe. I mean, it wasn't really a punk band, and it was also, I think there were sort of some songs that were kind of humorous and fun too. It was kind of just everything we were into at the time.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
And I guess everything overlaps, like your role at Echo Weekly. You know, you were part of that community as well. Can you talk about Echo for a minute, like for those who don't know what it was?
So Echo Weekly was an alternative newspaper that was in the Tri-City area.
It was my lifeline to knowing what was happening in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And before the internet, right? Especially, it was alternative newspapers served that purpose in all the markets. And so here we had Echo, and I wrote for Echo for a year, and then became the editor in I think maybe 2000, 2001, and did that for 4 or 5 years. And it was just, it was a tremendous job. It was a tremendously fun job for me because you get to be immersed in the artistic community and, kind of go and see stuff you might not have gone and seen before, and hear stuff you might not have seen before or heard before, and meet people and those kinds of things. And it kind of felt, like this vital link that you can kind of bring all these things together for people. So it was a lot of fun. And I really missed that. I mean, I missed Echo when I left. And I miss, because I'm a little bit older, obviously I don't mind social media, but I do kind of miss that sort of that alternative weekly vibe of a newspaper. And there are still some in a few different markets. There's one in Hamilton View, which is owned by the same people. There are a few around. But that was kind of a cool thing, I think, in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s.
Especially during that Canadian rock renaissance.
Totally,
just all those amazing bands. Pursuit of Happiness and
you think about that, right? And so if you're a band now trying to get press, I mean, who's going to give you press in print media right now? So
not just that, like if you don't have the followers and the engagement and the insights on social media,
exactly,
you're basically
right?
dead.
Exactly. Yeah, like so you have to do all this work, it seems, right? And have all these followers and everybody that likes you and all these kinds of things on various platforms on social media. Like,
and that doesn't mean that people are going to see it.
No, exactly. Whereas, back in when I was at Echo, like people I'd never heard of are sending me press kits and they're playing in town, and we needed to fill a page, and so it's like you get covered, right? And you get a pretty good article and a picture in the paper, and that's and because there wasn't internet, I guess a lot of people are reading that, right? And so you had a good audience. And I think that's probably what was happening in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s up until that point. I mean, I think that's kind of, that was a vital way for bands to get known. And there are other vital ways now, but I kind of miss that that's not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would get a feature story, like a cover story, I felt like a rock star. Like at the time,
Well, you were.
It was amazing. Speaking of rock stars, you teach a course called The History of Rock.
I do.
Am I correct in saying that you are a history of rock professor at the Wilfrid Laurier University?
Yeah. I do lots of things at Laurier, and so that's one of the courses I teach. I'm a sessional professor, and so I kind of essentially teach wherever I can get a job, and so I teach in the religion and culture department there, and I teach in the communication studies department, and I teach in the music faculty, and I also actually teach at Conestoga College. And the class you're talking about, Marshall, is for music, the history of rock, and that's a tremendously fun course that I think I've been teaching maybe for 12 years now, and it's like,
it must be a dream job.
It is, and one, because I obviously like the material, but the other thing is that the students really like the material, right? The students are there not because they have to be there, but they're there because they really want to be there, and you can really feel that, and people.
Something tells me there's no problem with enrollment for that course.
No, it's a very high enrollment, right?
When Marshall told me, I was like, "What? We have one of those?"
Yeah. But it's fun, and so it's very discussion based, and you get to I learn stuff all the time because students are experts in things I'm not expert in, even older music, right? But it's just it's fun in many ways, and I think one way it's kind of fun is sort of introducing students to maybe music and artists that they already know, but perhaps in ways that they don't know, or sort of issues surrounding them that they don't know, or those kinds of things, and it's quite a bit of fun. I'm teaching it online right now in the fall, or in the summer, and I'll be teaching it online in the fall, and then we'll have to wait and see what happens after that.
When I was a student at UW, I took a course that I think was kind of like the equivalent. It was called Contemporary Music and Rock and Roll or something.
Right. Was that at Conrad Grable?
Yeah, it was at Conrad Grable. And what it was so neat was the first class opens up with we learned about Gregorian chants, right? And how does your course open up? Like, where do you begin?
I don't go that far back. I go back to kind of the late 1940s. I mean, we talk a little bit about the birth of Tin Pan Alley, which would be the 1890s. But for the most part, I kind of gear the course to sort of the beginning of rock and roll, early 1950s, and then talk a little bit about what came before that and how it influenced that. So, for instance, like the so Tin Pan Alley is a term that refers to a business model of popular music in America from about 1890 up until the 1950s, and that it also refers to the genre of music of popular music, and it was also a place. But that business model was that professional songwriters wrote songs, and then other people who are professional singers sang those songs, right? Which is exactly the model of pop music today. And rock and roll kind of changed that for a while. And put the emphasis elsewhere, but since sort of the 2000s, I mean, that's kind of, we're back to that Tin Pan Alley, right? And so that's kind of how I start the course, is we kind of look at sort of what happened before rock and roll and sort of this music business, and then sort of talk about, have things changed? And then, we'd look at a Rihanna song or something like that, and
with the hooks at the beginning and past the 8 seconds, they need you to listen past that 8 seconds and past the 30-second mark so they can get paid. And then there's about 8 names in the title, so everyone gets their cut.
Yeah, and one of the names in the title is probably always Max Martin, because he's the Swede that writes all these songs for people, right? Or is part of these writing teams. So that's some of the kinds of things that we look at, and then of course we trace the chronology of various music genres too. But.
So I've just barely heard about that. I've heard someone say, "Well, who writes all those Backstreet Boys songs? Who are you talking about? Is it?" I've heard there's like Swedish songwriters or something, and they've written tons of the songs that we hear today.
Yeah, there was I can give you a really cool book on this later on, but Max Martin is sort of the most known one, and there's a few others, and there's these Swedes that in the 1990s were part of a production studio in Sweden that were essentially trying to break into the American market, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to sort of merge American R&B with a Swedish sense of pop and melody. And so Backstreet Boys comes out of this, and then Britney Spears and people like that, and so a few people from that studio have kind of gone out and done really well, and Max Martin is one of them. And if you Google Max Martin, he has had, let me just think, I think he's had, I believe he's up to 22. Is that correct? 22 number one hits with various people.
Do you recognize it? I'm leading myself into saying something here, but do you recognize it when you hear Max Martin's stuff?
I don't think so. I mean, no. I can hear some of it. And that's because, I've sort of looked at some resources, some people that have written about him and sort of listed his songs, and I can sort of hear those songs, and I might kind of say, oh, that kind of sounds like a Max Martin song, but then I'll Google it and it probably isn't. But because he's writing to a formula, but he's writing to a very popular pop music formula, right. as you yourself mentioned, right? I mean, you want to make sure that chorus, the hooks at the beginning, the chorus comes in at 30 seconds or something like that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I say that because a lot of stuff that I've listened to over the last 2 years has been produced by Jack Antonoff of Fun, and I think Bleachers is one of the bands. He's usually off on his own doing his own thing. But as soon as one of those songs comes through my mix or whatever it is I'm listening to, you can hear the Jack Antonoff hand on it. Yeah. And it's not something I recognized beforehand. So I was just wondering if you had that same example.
Yeah, I think I might do that with more sort of songwriters that, and musicians that I'm maybe a little bit more familiar with. I mean, Max, I kind of engage with through this business model way, and don't necessarily listen to the music he makes.
To that genre, yeah.
Because I enjoy that genre. But I could totally see how you can do that. I can do that with some producers, certain producers that I really like. I mean, I think everyone can do that with Daniel Lanois, if you know Daniel Lanois, right?
Yeah.
But in reggae, if you know Lee Perry or somebody like that, there's sort of certain sounds like, oh yeah, that's Lee Perry's drum sound or something like that.
It's so rewarding when you go back and find out that you were right.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's true.
Brent, when I think about your career, it's like a big puzzle that you put together all kind of beautifully. Like this, I can see how you built yourself all the way up to this a PhD, right?
Yeah.
What's your PhD in?
So my PhD is in religion and culture.
Yeah. But what's your thesis?
So the department was religion and culture, and my thesis was on a reggae musician by the name of Yellowman. So if you don't know him, Yellowman was he's still alive, but he was a very, very famous dancehall artist in the early 1980s. Bob Marley died in 1981. Yellowman was the biggest reggae star in the world by 1982, 1983, and kind of dominated a lot of the 1980s. But he was extremely controversial. Because of his material, which in Jamaica would be called slack or slackness. And so a lot of his songs were about sex, and very blatantly so, very crude songs. But I was very intrigued by him because he's singing these, fairly crude songs about sex right next to singing songs about Jah Rastafari, very religious songs, sort of using lyrics that would come out of a Rastafarian tradition that you might be more familiar with something like a Bob Marley song, right? And that kind of really intrigued me, how we could put these two things together. And I kind of thought, growing up, my dad was a minister, I went to church a lot. I absolutely hated Christian rock, and I thought it was the lamest music ever. And I kept sitting there, and I'd be like, I cannot imagine a Christian rock band singing about sex. I mean, that just couldn't happen, right?
No, because we don't talk about it.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
not something that you talk about.
And so I kind of, thinking about that, I kind of went back and sort of looked at Yellowman again. I grew up in Bermuda, so I grew up listening to Yellowman in the 1980s, right? And not thinking about it too much. And then later on, as I started my PhD, I started thinking about this. And I put all these together. And because I was in a program around religion and culture and religious studies, I was quite interested in religion and how people engage with religion, and how, in this case, they kind of use religion or sort of mobilize religious themes and religious icons and religious language in popular music, right? And this is so my dissertation was on Yellowman, and the book on Yellowman is actually finally hopefully going to come out this year. It's been accepted through the University of West Indies Press, and I was working this week on some edits on that. And so it's a book that is about music history. It's about dancehall history, but it's also about sort of the way that reggae artists kind of use Rastafari as kind of a religion, in their lyrics. And it's also about the fact that this guy was an albino, and because he was an albino, he was outright rejected in Jamaica. I mean, he was literally kicked to the curb. His parents threw him out in the trash in the first week of birth, and he grew up in orphanages, and he grew up thinking that he was worthless, and people telling him that he was worthless. And then he turns around and becomes the biggest star in Jamaica and the biggest star in dancehall. And so I kind of examine how he does that.
Brent, is a white male Canadian able to immerse himself so deeply into this music that you feel like you truly understood this culture as well as you could? Like, is there some part of it that you just never will quite understand?
Well, I think that, somebody that grows up in Jamaica and is Jamaican is always going to have a different understanding than someone else, right? And so, I can't claim to have that. I can sort of bring something else to the table, and so that's kind of. I'm sure there are things that I don't maybe understand as well as somebody else, and so. In this book, I think I kind of position myself that way. Someone who's listened to reggae all their life. Someone who grew up in an island that was very immersed in Jamaican popular culture, but somebody that is not Jamaican, right? Somebody that is born Canadian, and is standing outside of it because of that.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, that is. Look forward to reading that.
All right.
What was it about reggae music when you first heard it in your life that just, how do you even tell somebody about reggae music? Like we know the feeling we get from it, but how do you even explain it to somebody?
Well, I don't know how you explained it. I'll go back to the first one though about the feeling of it. When I moved to Bermuda in '82, and I remember I think it was the Bermuda Day Parade, which would have been May 24th, and there was a float, and there were people blasting a Rita Marley song. What's the name of it? I Want to Get High, So High, that one. Hey Rasta Man, hey what I say, give me some of your sensei. And that was the first time I actually thought about reggae and asked somebody, what is this, right? And slowly started to kind of get interested in that kind of music. I think, so going to your second question there, but how do you tell somebody about reggae? I think one way more recently I have come to think about and understand reggae is that it is a merging of an African musical aesthetic and a European musical aesthetic in a very perhaps similar way to a lot of African American music. And so if you look at African American music, which really is the basis of popular music today, so you go back to sort of the blues and the jazz and many forms of that kind of music, and even gospel, and then rock and roll is essentially a rhythm and blues, and rock and roll is essentially rhythm and blues with sort of a few country influences perhaps, and then going into R&B and soul and hip hop and all these forms of music, right? They are merging African musical ideals and European musical ideals, and Jamaica does it in a slightly different way. But one of those ideals has to do with what I might call remix. And so if you think of, like, I don't know if you know your hip hop history, but if you look at hip hop in the early 1970s, DJ Kool Herc and Grandmaster Flash, they were creating new songs by mixing together other songs, right? By mixing records. And so taking a drum beat from a James Brown record or something like that, and looping that on one turntable, and then perhaps mixing that in with a different drum beat on another turntable, and then eventually an MC starts talking over top of that, and that's a brand new song. It's a different song from that James Brown song, and it's a remix, and it's thinking of kind of creating a new song out of an existing song. And to me, that sort of is something that you see throughout a lot of forms of music that is derived from Africa.
And there's a few sort of reasons for that if you look at sort of music history in African music history. But that's kind of one way I think we can think about reggae, because this is, some people that don't like reggae might say, well, reggae sounds all the same. And as an outsider to any music genre, I think you're going to think that, you're going to think all country sounds the same, right? Or all ballroom dance music sounds the same or something like that. But there's a certain argument that you could say, yeah, reggae does kind of sound the same because since about the late 1960s, new reggae songs have very often been written using older tracks, like existing reggae songs, right? And not Bob Marley. Bob Marley's different. But most of the rest of the genre, if you were an artist, so Marshall, if you went into a studio and wrote a song, you might pair that song with an existing track that has already been recorded and released as another song. And so that's a form of remix, right? It's creating a new song out of an existing material. And so when I think of reggae that way, I can really see a lot of connections between reggae and hip hop and I mean, blues and jazz does this. I mean, how many blues bands have you heard that had the exact same bass line or blues songs, right? There's this idea of kind of recycling, and recycling is not bad. Recycling is actually really good.
And there's only so many combinations of sounds,
Sure, yeah.
really.
And when you hear somebody recycle something in a new way, it's really exciting. It's like, wow, like you took something that 7 other people took, but you put your own spin on it. And that's really cool. And that's one thing that reggae has and hip hop has, and even jazz, like a jazz musician has and a blues musician has, right? And so I'm not sure, I'm not really answering your question. I'm just kind of going off somewhere, I guess. But
I think you did.
Okay. Oh, as a way of kind of sort of master way of thinking about reggae, I guess.
Yeah. I too love Big Sugar. I saw them 27 times in concert.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
Wow.
A band with a lot of reggae influences, and their bass player just passed away last
Gary
year.
Lowe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, what other courses are you teaching?
Okay, so I very often, in religion and culture, I very often teach a class on religion and sexuality, which kind of looks at, broad different religious traditions or across broad eras, and, thinking about how sex and sexuality are constructed and sort of maintained. And
I was going to say controlled, but maintained is a
controlled.
nicer word.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but and resisted, right?
Yep.
And resisted, right? In religious traditions. I teach sometimes, not always, a religion and popular culture class. I teach in communication studies. There's a class that I sometimes teach that's the cultural studies of popular music. And then I have also taught a really cool class on music and technology. And that's a 4th-year seminar. That's kind of a lot of fun because you can go lots of different ways with music and technology, and you can think a lot about I think like MP3s, piracy, music piracy, all that kind of stuff, right? Spotify, the crux of that course is kind of how technology changes the way we interact with music, the way we think about music, the way we play music, the way we perform music, et cetera, distribute music, buy music, all that kind of stuff.
We've talked about this a few times on the podcast, but how we actually physically enjoy music has changed with the MP3.
How so?
With the flattening, the German creator, I can't think of the name right now, that invented the MP3 and how it flattens that original recording, taking out elements that you no longer hear anymore, right? Yeah. That you don't have the same experience that you would have listening to a record or being live.
And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of debates over the sound, right? So does vinyl actually sound better? And if they do, when they compress an MP3, they do sort of throw away a bunch of stuff. And can you actually hear that? And I find those debates really fascinating.
Yeah, there's a bunch of research on it too. I just read a book last year called How Music Works, and there was a great section on how they're talking about when you're listening to that MP3. If it's a song you're familiar with, if you are previously familiar with that song, that you're filling in the blanks of the stuff that you don't hear.
Oh yeah.
So then there's another different endorphin response that you're getting instead of the live version or the full version. Yeah.
And there's lots of debates around compression. And so in the 90s, what compression does is it kind of takes all the if you think of compression as volume, right? So it takes out the low volume and the high volume, and it kind of compresses them together, and essentially makes the song sound louder without physically getting louder. Mm-hmm. And so radio heavily compresses music, and so when you hear something on the radio, it sounds loud even if you're turning it down low. So that acoustic guitar break sounds as huge and as big as the electric guitar and that kind of stuff. And there are lots of kind of debates around whether that gives us fatigue, sort of listening, because you don't hear the dynamics of music anymore, and are we sort of always wired when we're listening to music because it's just coming at us full force. I'm not really sure. I know, Marshall, we spoke, I think, briefly about Guns N' Roses, and I remember quite loving Appetite for Destruction in high school. And then I saw Appetite for Destruction for $1 at a thrift store, and you can't turn down $1, right? And I remember, I really like this record, and so I bought it for $1 on CD and absolutely hated it. And I was,
So you're having a different experience.
I
And
was
your brain has to fill in those blanks.
I had a really different experience, and I still don't know if it's because just older me didn't like Guns N' Roses and didn't like the sound of it. It sounded really harsh and brittle, and I don't recall it sounding like that when I used to listen to it in the 1980s. I guess when it came out, 89, I think. And I looked at it, and it was the first generation of CDs, and so it was recorded analog, and then it was converted to digital. But from what I understand, there wasn't really a lot of remastering at that time to sort of, make it sound better on a disc in the digital realm, which they started doing later on. So maybe that's why it sounded kind of brittle. But maybe it's that compression thing.
Could be.
Something I struggle with Guns N' Roses with Appetite for Destruction is, so when I do hear it, I actually still feel all that love I have for the music and what it sounds like, but those lyrics we were listening to back in 1987,
They can be pretty bad, yeah.
Yeah, like I can't believe that I didn't question those lyrics.
No, it was a different time. Like there's stuff I question now, and having teenage daughters where I wouldn't have questioned it before. I recently skipped past the Beatles' "Run for Your Life."
Mm-hmm.
I love that song.
Yeah.
I always loved that song.
Yeah.
I'd rather
Run for
see
your
you
life,
dead
little girl, rather see you dead. Yeah, John Lennon.
than to be with another man.
And if
Like
you-
I have goosebumps just thinking about how that never registered with me as a young girl. How a theme of a lot of music, not just the Beatles, but through the 70s, 80s, and 90s is you better freaking watch yourself because I'm going to get what I want.
Yeah. And
Times
if you
have
look at
changed.
a lot of male rock and roll, a lot of the history of rock and roll, there's obviously a lot of misogyny and a lot of songs that are really blatantly about violence against women. So, one
Even
of
as a fantasy.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Down by the river, Neil Young, Down by the River, I Shot My Baby, which, and you can kind of think about that like, well, we put that in the murder ballad tradition, and I love to listen
That's
to
not what it's about, though. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But you're right, and now you kind of listen to it and you're like, oh, wow, yeah, maybe I'm not as cool with that as I once was.
Jimi Hendrix, Hey Joe is coming to mind.
Yeah. I was thinking of this recently, the Beastie Boys, because people still love to love the Beastie Boys, right?
No, but I mean, come on.
I'm crossing a line for you now.
You're not. No. You're not crossing a line at all. I rolled up here last week for our interview with Rob Witherspoon, listening to Beastie Boys because I love them. I will always love them. But there's just two levels there. They had one, what the lyrics were. And again, it was, well, we're so great that your pants are going to fall off. And again, we're going to get what we want. And the other thing was the lifestyle that they were living. And if you see some of that footage that, I'm sure there's tons of it out there, but I've seen some footage where they're doing sort of handheld camera interviews with the Beastie Boys, and they're just shoving their hands down the front of girls' pants. And you could see them you could see the women reacting and then realizing there's a camera on them and changing their reaction to be as though they're enjoying it. It was a whole lifestyle, and that was the difference. Like right now, if an artist screws up, they're basically dead, and back then you could get away with a lot more, and that transferred into the music, and it was part of our culture, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did a great job with that. I've got some other questions too. I don't know if you can answer these, Brent, but when I look at an artist like Ron Sexsmith today, like why isn't Ron Sexsmith playing massive arenas?
Maybe he doesn't want to.
I can't answer that, but I don't really know where he plays. I've seen him a few times in sometimes bigger places, I guess.
I'm talking about these artists that are just clearly just incredible songwriters.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to talk about any specific musician because I don't really know them, but it seems to me that people that tend to do well and are successful are also people that have sort of figured out the business side of it. And I don't think that's true across the board, but I think for a lot of people, right, that if you're going to think of music as your job, then you need to it has to be your full-time job, right? And you have to figure out, how do I market this product? This is a product. How do I market it? How do I do all these kinds of things?
Yeah, the rock and roll lifestyle doesn't work for everyone for just getting picked up and swept off your feet, right?
And I think it's the rock and roll history is filled with stories of people that has happened to, and so I think maybe we tend to think that that's how it always happens. But I think there's a lot of hard work behind many of the people that actually do it. I mean, Danny Michel is a tremendously great songwriter. I think the man works really, really hard.
I think he does, yeah.
And not that other people haven't worked hard, but I think perhaps he just has that business side figured out.
Probably working hard at the right things.
Yeah.
Right.
Brent, where are you at as a musician right now? Like, you're playing some songs for us here tonight, but with you're a parent, you're an instructor, a professor. Where does this fit into your life right now? Are you performing anywhere other than for us?
I assume you're not painting houses and businesses anymore.
I'm not painting houses anymore. No.
Yeah, basically, I'm asking you, where are you at?
Yeah. So I have a band called the Baudelaires, and we've been doing that since I think 2007, maybe 2008, something like that.
So is that Baudelaire like the poet or like the Lemony Snicket family?
The poet. I didn't even know about the Lemony Snicket until after, actually. It was the poet, and it was sort of this idea that it was kind of decadence, right? Sort of this decadence movement, and we were going to make decadent reggae. And the idea for the band was kind of, for me anyway, was rooted around Toots and the Maytals is a reggae artist that had a bunch of hits in the 60s, and I love that 60s sound. And I kind of wanted to do that. I mean, I didn't want to recreate a 60s sound, but I wanted to kind of tap into that vibe a bit, and a few other things. That's kind of where it sort of started. And so, this is a band that's kind of been around a bit, and we've put out a few records. We all have full-time jobs, so we don't play a lot, right? I'd kind of like to play more. It's kind of hard right now, obviously, with the quarantine and the lockdown. So I guess for me, musically, I continue to write, I continue to play, and I have other people that I tend to play with just sort of ad hoc and informally, and occasionally do gigs with as well. So you might know Scott Wicken, Paul McInnes. I've for years and years and years played and gigged with those guys. And a few other guys as well that I tend to play with now.
I'm going to mess up podcast time here, but we did hear you play 3 songs tonight that will disperse across the episode. I just wanted to say, like the first song, Matt Osborne tribute song, I did hear a lot of like 1950s storytelling, like maybe Del Shannon or Richie Valens, like that sort of boppy, beautiful storytelling that's fun while you're also sort of taking something in. Right. But then the other 2 songs, I actually heard more like the Shins and Pavement. Do you hear that in yourself at all?
I wouldn't know.
But with a sweeter voice. I mean, I would never compare your voice to to those 2. But,
no, I mean, I never would have thought of any of those influences, but that's cool that you say that.
It's a great compliment, too.
Yeah. As far as the first one and the storytelling, and I like the fact that you say sort of there's that funness. Sometimes I think that music misses the funness aspect, and I really seriously like serious music. But I also
the more sad and serious a song is, the more I enjoy it.
Yeah. But sometimes I just kind of think like sometimes sometimes music is just supposed to be fun, and so the fact that you see a bit of that in there is a compliment to me. The other ones, what other songs did I play there?
You played. You got the band back together, The Sound of the 20th Century, and the Path of Least Resistance.
Oh yeah. Actually, what I was kind of going for with the Path of Least Resistance is I really got into bluegrass a couple of years back.
That's the one where I really felt I heard Pavement.
Okay, that's funny. Mm-hmm. But for me, I wasn't really trying to create bluegrass, but I really fell in love with a guy by the name of Ralph Stanley. So if you've seen Oh Brother Where Art Thou, Ralph Stanley sings Oh Death in that. And like his just sort of the voice and the lyrics and the kind of stuff that they used to do really kind of blew me away. And so that was in the back of my mind when I was writing the song. I don't think it really sounds like the Stanley Brothers at all, but I don't know. I think, when I listen to other artists, I often do what you're doing here, like try to figure out, where does this come from? Mm-hmm. And I think one thing I love about music is sort of hearing diverse influences, coming out in different ways, right?
Mm-hmm. So even if it's little snippets sometimes.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I'm a huge Bob Marley fan. I wrote a book on Bob Marley. Mm-hmm. And Bob Marley loved Curtis Mayfield. And once I figured that out and I went back and I listened to Curtis Mayfield, I was like,
wow.
Just all of a sudden everything opens up. And then I realized he loved Otis Redding and he loved James Brown. Mm-hmm. And I went back and I listened to his music with that in mind. Stuff I hadn't really heard before. It's like, now I get it.
Now you
right?
feel it. Now you hear it. Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like sort of this puzzle. And you talked about puzzles before, but sort of thinking about where all these things fit together. It would be nice if there were clearer paths, I think, for people in the arts and in music to sort of go through and know how they can make a living. And I don't think those paths are always clear. Yeah.
Why was the A in STEAM an afterthought? Just like, let's throw this A into STEM and see what happens, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Brenda, as we wrap up here, I want to ask you about how you lived through the same time that we did here in KW, and that there were clubs called the Volcano and the Robinsons and Stages and all these places. And Guelph had Club Denim and at London, I forget what they had, but
and Guelph had the Trash and
the Trash area. And
Albion.
I was just going to say the Albion. That's right. Yeah.
When you reflect back on that time, like it came and then it went, and I don't think any of us ever thought it would go away. We just
I thought I would be going to those clubs and listening to live music forever.
Well, something blew me away probably really when I started teaching the history of rock class. So that was 2012. And I would always ask students, what's the last concert that you saw?
No, they don't.
And then I had to start asking who has been to a concert. And then I started realizing that, and maybe it's because of where we live, like we were drawing a lot of students from the GTA, but many of the people who had actually been to a concert, and that might be 10% of the class, had gone to see something huge, right, at some massive stadium. Or so recently, last couple of years, people have seen Adele and things like that, right? But that idea of being in university and going out to see a band.
It's not what they do. They go out and they look at their phones.
Yeah, I guess they do other things, right? Yeah. And I think they have very fulfilling, rich lives. But that there's a bit of nostalgia for me that sort of like, oh, this is what we used to do. The first time I saw Paul McLeod was at Phil's, right?
Same.
And Danny Michel and Shannon Lyon and Rob Zabo and all these guys that I followed at the Walper. And I knew that, every Wednesday night Shannon Lyon played at the Walper. And so, my wife and I on, Wednesday night would be at the Walper to watch him. And there's a bit of that now, but not much at all. And all those guys actually were great songwriters too.
They were, yeah. I used to think, like, how is this all here? I still say that sometimes to Marshall about this podcast. Like, how do we keep finding these amazing people right under our noses, right here in town, yourself included? But I remember being young and thinking, how are all these people here? How did they get to that point? And they're just from little KW, just from our little town.
Well, and I always wonder if every town's like that. So
I'm sure there is.
I've lived in a few towns, but I think came of musical age in this town, and so that's I feel the same way as you. But I think and I hope that all other towns are like that. I think there's lots and lots of people who do very interesting and beautiful things musically and artistically. And it seems, I think, going back to your kind of original question, that now in 2020, it's perhaps harder to find a place to actually put that on display and to maybe make a living out of that.
And I think it's a little more cliquey now. It's not just kind of more open to the masses of just, there's nothing really else to do, so let's go see some live music. Yeah. I think it's more of a closed activity now. And
I think, there's certainly obviously newer opportunities with, anybody can now put something on Spotify, on YouTube, and these kinds of things. But for me, and I think maybe for you guys, you are kind of missing a little bit of that, connection of just going to see a smaller band in town play. And what I actually really miss is that there used to be lots of bands touring through, right? So the bands that I listened to on the radio and the bands I was really into came to my town and played in my town, and I could go to see them at the Volcano for $7 and $10 and these kinds of things, right? And it's been a while since I've seen that, and that kind of makes me sad.
Yeah, that part's definitely changed. Yeah, you could always kind of rely on somebody, a couple times a year, somebody bigger coming through. You're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hey, thanks a lot for that first writing job you gave me.
You're welcome.
Did it work out for you?
I did you well, yeah.
I'm glad.
Thanks, Brent. Hey, thanks for coming in today.
I had money on you, man.
Yeah.
It's mighty late and getting darker, but my need is getting dire, 'cause I'm hindered by the feeling that my wheel will catch on fire. This troubled engine that I'm driving only has a little breath, and it can't take no trick riding, and it can't take no violent threat. Oh, if stones are in my pathway, I won't moan. I'll take the path of least resistance home. If hellhounds, they should recognize my scent. I'll take the path of least resistance. There are roadblocks on the highway, and there are chains across the gate, and there are locks on every entry, and there are ghosts every face. I would pray, but the reception around here is pretty poor, and I can't get no message through. And if I did, it was ignored. So if stones are in my pathway, I won't moan. I'll take the path of least resistance home. If hellhounds, they should recognize my scent. I'll take the path of least resistance. There are weights on all my footsteps. There is worry on my mind. How many barriers surround me and turn my path to crooked miles? Well, I could wager on the outcome, but the cost is far too dear to waste my time on some all-rounder pouring poison in my ear. So when stones are in my pathway, I won't moan. I'll take the path of least resistance home. If hellhounds, they should recognize my scent. I'll take the path of least resistance.
Hey all, thanks for meeting us in Bonn Park. Please like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on the platform that you're listening to. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Bonn Park Podcast. Original music by Alan Lung.